The dinner table had grown cold, just like the roast sitting between us, but the silence in the room was far heavier than the quiet outside. My daughter-in-law, Chloe, leaned back with a self-satisfied smirk, holding her wine glass as if she had just won a major prize. She looked directly at me and remarked that some people spend their whole lives freeloading off others without ever feeling ashamed. My son, Brandon, kept his eyes glued to his plate, completely paralyzed, while my young grandson innocently asked for another serving of potatoes. I calmly folded my napkin, looked straight at Chloe, and told her in a steady voice that if I was truly a leech, then she should have no problem paying her own mortgage starting next month. The sudden hush that fell over the dining room was absolute, cutting through the warm air like a blade. Chloe's arrogant smile instantly vanished, replaced by a sudden wave of confusion and genuine panic, while Brandon nervously shifted in his chair. I did not yell, nor did I demand an apology, because I had spent far too many years keeping quiet while my generosity was treated like an endless supply of free cash. Excusing myself from the table, I walked down the hallway, listening to the soft click of the front door latching behind me like the final period at the end of a long, painful chapter. As I stepped out into the damp night air, the streetlights cast sharp shadows across the driveway, matching the cold clarity settling inside my mind. Sitting alone in my car, I stared at my reflection in the dark windshield and realized I was no longer angry, just completely drained. Ever since my husband passed away, I had poured all my time, energy, and savings into trying to keep my son's household afloat. Brandon had begged me to move closer after his father died, using his gentle voice and familiar habits to pull me into his daily struggles. I had willingly packed up my life, believing that supporting my family was the best way to honor my husband's memory. When I first arrived, Chloe greeted me with polite distance, already talking endlessly about her dream of expanding her small floral business into a high-end boutique shop. In those early days, I was more than happy to help them through every financial storm that came their way. When their family car broke down during a harsh winter, I paid the entire mechanic bill without asking for a single cent in return. When Brandon faced reduced hours at his job, I quietly covered their monthly housing payments to ensure my grandson kept a roof over his head. My late husband always said I possessed a banker's heart because I paid strict attention to details and naturally trusted people. I genuinely believed that my unconditional kindness would build a strong bond of mutual respect, so when Chloe needed $15,000 to open her flower shop, I wrote the check immediately. For the first 2 years, Chloe treated me like her savior, constantly thanking me and bringing me coffee whenever I dropped by her store. I spent countless evenings sitting at her back counter, helping her organize receipts, track inventory, and manage her business accounts while she worked. I never demanded repayment because seeing them succeed was all the reward I thought I needed from my own family. But as her boutique grew popular, her gratitude slowly eroded into arrogance, replaced by expensive designer clothes and lavish personal spending. She began making major financial decisions without consulting anyone, leaving unpaid supplier bills tucked away inside the cash register while bragging about her profits to friends. Everything came crashing down when a major commercial supplier went bankrupt and a high-paying wedding client unexpectedly canceled their contract. Chloe called me sobbing hysterically, claiming her business was completely ruined and that she would have to declare bankruptcy within days. Seeing her distress, I transferred $72,000 directly from my savings account to cover her massive debts and keep the doors open. However, this time I drew up a formal legal agreement granting me 60% business ownership until the debt was fully cleared. We both signed and notarized the contract, and while I told myself it was just standard procedure, deep down I knew I needed protection. For a few months, things seemed to return to normal as Chloe sent frequent text messages thanking me for saving her livelihood. But as her business stabilized, her public image completely erased my existence from the company's success story. Her social media pages were suddenly filled with glamorous photos of herself at trade shows, driving a brand new luxury vehicle, and taking full credit for everything. When I stopped by the shop one afternoon with homemade snacks, she barely acknowledged me, and rudely stated that her financial business was none of my concern. Hearing those harsh words from someone whose life I had repeatedly saved made me realize that my ongoing generosity was being treated with utter contempt. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table with a thick accordion folder containing every financial record from the past several years. Spread out before me were bank statements, canceled checks, property payment records, and the notarized business agreement we had both signed. Looking at the exact figures written on paper, I finally confronted the reality that I had been funding their luxurious lifestyle while completely neglecting my own boundaries. A profound shift occurred inside me as I realized I was no longer acting as a helpful mother, but rather as an exploited safety net. The next morning, I carefully organized every single document, determined to stop letting my family walk all over my self-respect. I spent the next few days preparing my legal documentation, ensuring that every bank transfer, signed contract, and text message was properly archived. I placed the original files inside a secure personal safe, knowing that numbers do not carry emotional bias or false narratives. When I tried visiting their house later that week to drop off food, Chloe treated me like an unwelcome intruder while talking loudly on the phone. Shortly after I returned home, Brandon called me in a panic, begging me not to enforce the business agreement or ruin his wife's reputation. I told him calmly that I had remained quiet for years while being taken advantage of, and that my patience had finally reached its absolute limit. A week later, an official letter arrived from a downtown law firm, revealing that Chloe was attempting to legally strip me of my ownership stake for just $1. Reading her aggressive demand made me laugh out loud at the sheer audacity of someone trying to steal from the person who saved her. I immediately scheduled a meeting with my late husband's trusted attorney, an experienced professional named Mr. Vance, who operated out of a quiet downtown office. After reviewing my detailed financial trails and signed agreements, Mr. Vance assured me that my legal standing was completely airtight and impossible to break. He told me that we could easily enforce the contract in court, giving me a sudden sense of relief I had not felt in years. When Brandon called me again to plead for his wife, his voice sounded desperate, accusing me of trying to destroy their personal happiness. I reminded him that true pressure does not justify heartless behavior, and that I could no longer bleed financially just to keep their illusions alive. He fell completely silent, unable to argue against the cold facts of the situation, before hanging up the phone without another word. A few days later, I ran into Chloe at a local shopping center while she was unloading inventory from her vehicle. When she tried to act victimized, I looked her directly in the eye and told her gently that I would no longer enable her entitlement. The court date arrived on a freezing February morning, and I walked up the courthouse steps with a calm, unwavering sense of purpose. Inside the small courtroom, Chloe sat with her attorney while Brandon stared blankly at the floor, visibly consumed by guilt and discomfort. Chloe's lawyer tried to frame me as an overbearing mother-in-law who used money to manipulate and control young business owners. But when Mr. Vance presented the exact paper trail, signed contracts, and desperate text messages asking for loans, the entire room went silent. The judge carefully reviewed the evidence, dismissed their frivolous claims on the spot, and ruled that my 60% ownership agreement was fully legally binding. As we exited the courtroom into the cold afternoon air, Chloe turned to me with rage in her eyes, claiming that I had completely ruined their lives. I looked at her with total composure and replied that I had not destroyed anything, but had simply stopped building a life for people who did not respect me. Brandon could not even bring himself to meet my gaze as he quietly followed his wife toward their car and drove away into the distance. That evening, I sat in my quiet living room sipping hot tea, feeling an overwhelming sense of emotional freedom finally wash over me. I realized that setting firm boundaries was not about seeking revenge, but about protecting my own dignity and personal peace. By the time late spring arrived, I devoted my days to working in my backyard garden, turning the rich soil and planting fresh flowers. The physical labor was deeply therapeutic, helping me wash away the remaining bitterness from the painful legal battle I had endured. When Brandon sent a brief text message months later asking if we could talk, I replied that we could reconnect whenever he was ready to speak with honesty. Sitting on my porch in the warm sunlight, I opened my personal ledger one last time and wrote down that my peace of mind was fully restored. I finally understood that true family love cannot exist without basic respect, and for the first time in years, my home felt truly complete.